Hello, welcome to our presentation. Today we are going to be talking about fostering a multicultural perspective to improve mental health outcomes of the Latinx youth. We are working as a group and our names are Danya Barbosa, Alexis Slocum, Letitia, is it Tokplo, and JL Wright. So the first thing that we want to discuss before we jump into anything further is the population. The population that we chose again is Latinx youth. We are definitely focusing more on the middle to high school range of age. The first thing that I wanted to cover is just the idea that the Hispanic population within the United States is steadily increasing. They are becoming one of the largest minority group in America, so it is definitely important to understand the group as a whole. It's also very important to consider the fact that the Hispanic community is not made up of people from just one country because there are so many Spanish speaking countries in Latin America. There is Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. They all have their own cultures, they all have their own traditions and their way of speaking, their way of life. So it's definitely important to not put them in one bubble and to understand that they also differ even within the Hispanic community. Some things that can kind of change their traditions and their culture a little bit is one is education and the other would be social class. And then also we have to take into consideration acculturation, which occurs when immigrants try to adjust their cultural values and belief systems to accommodate the dominant culture within the country that they have immigrated to. So for instance, if somebody from Latin America moves into the United States, they're going to have to try and adjust to the American United States culture while still trying to maintain their home culture from Latin America. This might also change if they have spent a long time in the United States. That can also change the different cultural practices within the Hispanic community. Next slide. Some things that we also wanted to discuss is just the influence that Hispanic parents have when they're raising their children. They are very influenced by their ethnicity, their race, their cultural beliefs. They also tend to be very authoritarian when they are parenting. They prefer obedience and conformity. They want their children to act a certain way, and they want their children's behavior to mirror that of their cultural expectations. And another thing to consider is just the difference between second generation and first generation Hispanics, because first generation, they usually have come here after they have already grown up a bit in their home country. So English is most likely their second language. They might not have a lot of American influence. So they might have a completely different outlook, and worldview, depending on their culture. Whereas second generation Hispanic children, they have most likely grown up in the United States for most of their life. They listen to American music. They have grown up around American friends who are Caucasian or African American. So they have a very different outlook on life, and they have a lot of different influences that can kind of change their perspective. So again, it's definitely important to understand that there could also be very big differences between first generation and second generation Hispanic students. So to just kind of wrap up the population section, it's just very important that counselors take into consideration the acculturation stress that Hispanic students face. Also, just the fact that they might also perceive that they have experienced discrimination, maybe feelings of being unwelcome in the United States. So just remember that as you're counseling Latin American youth.
So I will be starting off with the literature. I'll I'll be starting off with the literature review. Um, The population of the Latino youth immigrants is growing exponentially at exponential rate, which now they are considered 25% of youth in America. So with this youth rate increasing, or with this population rate increasing, it is believed that the level and amount of stressors are increasing as well. And in our research, we have found that counselors lack the competency on how to treat this population, which poses a major public health concern in the Latino youth population and in mental health. But with this also, the public health concern is not solely based off of the lack of competencies in counselors. It is also based off of the underutilization of services in this community, and the poor engagement and premature termination of services and treatment. With all of this, it is highly important for counselors to advocate for multicultural requirements in all aspects of counseling, especially when dealing with mental health and undocumented immigrants, which leads us into our next slide. So first generation Latinx are usually undocumented immigrants who fear deportation, and it is important to know the traumas that are associated with these first generation Latinos. And of course, to know all of the mental health disorders that are associated with immigration that are listed here. Undocumented immigrants are more likely to experience mental health issues and experience trauma, such as pre-migration trauma during migration, trauma due to racism, and difficulties with acculturation. Other factors that influence trauma and stress are the social economic status of these immigrants and Latino youth, the parental education levels, and the location, which can directly influence the access to treatment and services in mental health. Lastly, it is important to note that the Latino community often seeks religious leaders, primary care physicians, and health practitioners rather than mental health counselors. That's what we found in our research. And there are many structural barriers between the community and mental health services, such as parents working multiple jobs or living in poverty-stricken communities.
In continuation with the literature review, I'll be talking about the family dynamic. So, from an ethic perspective, Latino families tend to depend on the values of familismo, which is orientation to family and respect for parents and other adults. However, these dynamics shift as Latino youth adapt to standards of their peers. So that means that intergenerational conflicts arise in the home as a result of opposing customs and values within the dominant culture. So as Latino youth integrate more into the US when they go to school, they tend to forget their association with their family background and try to adapt more to the US way of things, the United States way of things. There's also an issue within the first generation, which is called the first generation stigma. As mentioned before, parenting can be seen as authoritarian. This stigma also shows up in the educational field. So within that field, there are various levels that some Latino youth may be categorized as. The levels are listed here. We have survival level, and in that level, you'll hear a lot of the Latino youth asking for someone to tell them what they need to know about schools and what should they do. So they're looking for someone to assist them and help them out. In the exploratory level, they want to know how should they present themselves, what knowledge and skills do they need to have within schools. And in the settled level, it's more of an assertive role. So they try to say things like, I know what I have to do to get results, and to have their rights respected. So, with all of those things that we have, what can a counselor do? Counselors, first, before we go on to what can counselors do, we have to realize that with these fixed mindsets, it is easy to assume that the Latino population either does not need help or they don't want any help. So with that, our question is, what can counselors do? Counselors can assist Latino youth by demonstrating multicultural social justice competence. And this can happen by increasing self awareness of their own identity, biases, and privilege. Counselors can use a person centered approach to establish a healthy therapeutic relationship in hopes of making Latino youth feel comfortable with sharing their personal and culturally unique experiences. And lastly, counselors have to tailor their approach to the individual. With the Latino population, they have a diverse population, which was also mentioned before, and it originates over more than 20 countries in Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. So what you do with one Latino youth, you cannot do with another, especially if their cultural background is different.
Now, when it came to addressing the issues that we might see in the Latin American youth population, we reviewed the literature and found out that CBT was one of the most supported approaches in addressing the issues of anxiety and depression within the Latinx youth population. So CBT in general is connected to our cognitive processes, emotions, and behaviors. It makes the connection between what we think, feel, and how we behave. And whether it comes to anxiety or depression or intergenerational conflict, those are those have different manifestations in the behavior that the Latin American youth may present when they come to counseling. Therefore, we chose CBT as our approach as well. And we focused on teaching coping skills through our activity plan. We also selected a couple of stress-based mindfulness, stress-based reduction, uh, mindfulness-based stress reduction. So we focused on those different things in order to address their issues, because CBT has also been proven to be present-centered and problem-oriented. That means that if we can observe a certain behavioral issue in the youth, we can address that with addressing their thoughts, their feelings, and then linking back to the behavior that we're seeing. So um, in the literature, we also found that depression and anxiety were two of the major concerns, and CBT has been a proven intervention for depression and anxiety in Latinx youth and for other diverse populations in general. Excuse me. So um, from a diversity perspective, CBT is also known to have different components that support healing, the healing process. And there is not only the individual one-on-one person counseling relationship that serves as a method of healing, but also thinking about the external environment and the psychoeducation that we might provide that provides learning and changing those thinking patterns and changing the way their internal dialogue and the way they feel and leading to a change in behavior. One thing that has also been mentioned in the literature is that CBT is brief. So it is for people who may not have as much time to dedicate to counseling. It's an approach that is very useful. It gets the job done. And for the Latinx population, sometimes parents might have multiple jobs, which does not allow them to spend a lot of time in other activities. So the fact that the approach is brief, and since um, we also put in an intervention that involved the parents, that would be beneficial for them. So some of the problems that the youth may experience, the depression and anxiety might stem from loneliness or perceived discrimination at school, or fear of deportation or separation from the families for those who are first generation or second generation, or live with other people who might be undocumented at the moment. So those may um, those may lead to those diagnoses that we would want to address with CBT. Also, issues with identity might arise, whether it is gender identity or just identifying with their culture and having that challenge by their peers at school. So in all cases, we saw that different approaches of CBT were going to be beneficial to address the issues that this population may encounter. So our intervention contained a school counseling plan and a clinical mental health activity plan. We got to review all the different approaches of CBT that we could use, and the activities that we chose were kind of a multimodal eclectic plan to address multiple issues in a brief time. So activity one, for example, for school counseling, use some mindfulness-based stress reduction activities, meditations, and such, so that we can start teaching those coping skills to the Latinx youth. Then we also utilized REBT, which was concerned with their thoughts, the negative thought patterns that they might have, the worries that they might have, and they might bring to counseling. So that approach would help them bring them to the surface and even share them with one another, so that it can release some of that pressure and can help them resolve those issues. For activity 3 in our school counseling plan, we use a strength-based approach, which was concerned with highlighting their positive qualities and them sharing them with one another, which would help them build on those strengths and build that resilience that's necessary for them to be successful in counseling. We also chose, we also added other components of REBT that was concerned with their mindsets and behaviors, and just to get them bring into the forefront what they're actually thinking, which is linked to usually how they're behaving. And we would want to bring those thoughts, especially the negative ones, to the surface in order to address them. Then for our clinical mental health plan, we were more concerned with, we were still concerned with using REBT, still challenging those irrational beliefs and thoughts, and replacing them with healthier and rational ones, which is one of the main premises of CBT in general. We also utilize behavior therapy in general, which had many different layers to it. We utilize different activities like role playing, and lay down the foundation to later on down the line implement a systematic desensitization approach, helping them grade things that may bring anxiety in a hierarchy, and have them learn progressive relaxation so that they can be better able to cope with different stressors again. And we also utilize mindfulness-based strategies, which are very important in CBT as well. And we plan on even the parents and the students or the youth to role play and switch places and kind of share their experience of different things that they may encounter that may provoke anxiety, such as being asked to translate, because that was like an anxiety provoking situation for youth that we found in the literature. So we talked about positive reinforcement. How can parents help their kids get more, um, do better in school, for example, or be comfortable with who they are and their identity? We also chose to do a cultural plan or cultural night, which would involve not only the parents and children, but also the community at large, the school personnel, which was in tune with our social justice component and us being intentional in also making an attempt to change the environment and not just focusing on the individual, because as multicultural counselors, we go beyond the individual. We do not just stop our approach at the person, because the person is not usually the problem, but they are more, there is a lot of other things to consider when it comes to the effect that their environment has on them.
So the first plan that we will be demonstrating today is the clinical mental health counseling plan. The name of the clinical mental health counseling plan is called Bridging the Gap, in which the goal is to bridge the gap of understanding of mental health between person and self, parent and child, and family and community. In the clinical mental health plan, we comprise 4 50-minute sessions in which we utilize CBT for both the youth and their parents. The activity that we chose to demonstrate in this presentation is the activity that's listed here, which was an icebreaker, the human bingo, a working activity, and open discussion. But today we'll just be doing the, for the sake of this presentation, we'll just be doing the working activity, which is called Thoughts on Trial. Next slide. So Thoughts on Trial is a way, this is a CBT worksheet actually, in which these are the instructions that the facilitator will have to follow if facilitating. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So each participant has gotten a worksheet. And the instructions for this worksheet are: think of a situation concerning your family and or culture that initiates a negative thought in your mind. In the box labeled My Thought, write down your initial thought of yourself. You may also make a note of the situation that the thought is referring to. In the box labeled The Defense, write down facts that give evidence to that thought or make that thought true. In the box labeled The Prosecution, write down the facts that confute or disprove that thought. When you're finished with listing the facts, in the box labeled The Judge's Verdict, you will evaluate the facts from both the defense and the prosecution to determine whether the thought is true or false. And you will write that verdict and an explanation in the box labeled The Judge's Verdict. So we can give the participants, we're going to give the participants a minute to complete that. And then we'll have them share whatever they wrote down.
Thank you, JL, for this activity. I could definitely relate to the activity of challenging those thoughts that we might have, that as an immigrant, coming from Benin and having started college in the US about 10 years ago, I definitely could relate to having negative thoughts associated with my culture. So it was very helpful to get those thoughts on paper and to really see how they might have influenced me negatively. I feel like right now I'm at a better place where I have not thought about those things in a while, but I would share, I would like to share a thought that I used to have, especially when I was first here, when was first in the US. The thought, I guess, was that I don't belong or I'm not welcome, because people used to ask me all the time, when are you going back home? And I was like, why would they ask me that? So the defense for the thought that would maybe make it true was that they don't want me here because they're asking, or this is not my country, so I don't belong here, and they're right. Or I've been asked severally by different people, so that must be true. People must be thinking that when they see me. But when I think about it from a rational mind, the prosecution or the facts against that are that maybe they're worried about me missing my family. Maybe they're concerned for me. Maybe uh, they didn't bring me here, so they don't get to say when I get to leave. And my life is here now. So another one is I came here for a reason. I will accomplish my goals, and I don't need your permission to be here. Some people, and some people doesn't mean all people. So the verdict is that I belong where I choose to be, and no one gets to determine that but me. And I'm here. So thank you, JL, for that activity.
Thank you for sharing.
All right, so going into our school counseling plan, because we do have two majors, our title of our entire plan would be presenting mindfulness strategies when depression and anxiety take over. So this will be a 4-week 50-minute session plan using classroom guidance. Um, we are going to just tell you what's going on with the activity, so that you all can kind of get a gist of what will happen. So we would gather students, complete a needs assessment, and then we would go on to showing them how comfortable they could be with each other. We create a group that with that. So the activity we're personally going over is the write and rip role play. And with this, we would basically have each person take out a sheet of paper, and they would have a sheet of paper nearby. And my group members are doing that as well. And then the purpose of this activity is to have students be able to pause and practice letting go so that we can be present and ready to learn. So we'll now begin with our activity. I ask that everyone pause for a moment to scan your body. Pay attention to areas of your body that may have stress and ask yourself, what is it that you need to let go? Now, I want you to write any negative thought on a piece of paper, the piece of paper near you. You may even draw your emotions, write a phrase, or anything that represents something negative happening in your life. And I'll give you a moment to do so. All right. Now you're going to take that sheet of paper. And as you take that sheet of paper, you're going to rip it up. So go ahead and rip it. You can rip it into 1,000 pieces if you like. It is completely up to you, but you are ripping up that paper and you are going to throw it away in the recycling bin or in a trash can near you. And this representation shows that by throwing away our worries and thoughts, we are empowering ourselves to let go of stress. And with this activity, we hope that our students will know that that they can throw away any issues or any problems that they may be feeling, and to get them prepared to listen to other things that are going on and be mindful of other people that are near them. With this activity, it would usually take about 20 minutes to kind of give them the mindfulness instruction, as well as if they choose to share any of their thoughts or their feelings associated with that activity. But all students should know that there will not be any, no one will know what they wrote on their paper.
And that concludes our presentation for today. The most important thing that I think most of us in the group got from this project is just the importance of multicultural competence when you are providing any kind of mental health care to any kind of client from any culture with any background. So it doesn't matter what somebody looks like or what culture they are a part of. It's best to just have an open mind to understand that everybody is different no matter where they are from, even if they are in the same community, as we talked about with the Latinx community. They're so diverse. So just keep an open mind, and that's it for today.